Welcome back. In lecture 2.1, we just barely cracked the shell of project management by sort of gaining a bit of an understanding for what a project is, what project management is, the various stages of project management, and why project management is important. And we also got a little bit of a high level of what project managers do. Again, some of that may have been a refresher for some of you. Others may be learning that information for the very first time. Both is completely okay, but today we'll be sort of peeling that shell back a little bit further, and we're going to dive into project management methodologies. Starting with development approaches, we'll also take a look at sequential approaches, the Agile family of project management, process-based methodologies, change management methodologies, and then finally the PMBOK method, which should look pretty familiar just because that's the book you're going to be reading from. Some of the learning objectives that I hope you have by the end of lecture 2.2 here are just the idea that you should have an understanding and ability to describe key differences between project management methodologies, including sequential and agile, comparing sequential and agile frameworks to identify their unique features and shared principles. You should also be able to describe the key differences between process-based and change management methodologies and evaluate a project or process and identify the correct project management type that's being used. You'll also be drafting a project plan and comparing various project management methodologies to meet specific requirements, which will be part of your lab that you'll be doing following this assignment in Canvas, so be sure to follow up with that. So, take a gander at this slide for a moment, and I'll bet I can tell what you might be thinking. You mean there's more than one way to manage a project? Actually, there are quite a few of them. Lots, actually. Some methods even combine with others to form new sort of hybrid approaches. But what are these different approaches exactly? How do they help project teams work better? And what makes one methodology better or potentially more useful than another? Project management methodologies, sometimes called project approaches, you'll hear me say it both ways in this class, are the means used to create and evolve the product, service, or result during the project's lifecycle. Project management methodologies are essentially different ways to approach a project, and each one has a unique process or workflow, and different industries may use different terms to refer to various project approaches. However, the important thing to remember when it comes to picking an approach is that all methodologies exist on a spectrum. And if we compare this spectrum to something like the light spectrum, where in the middle you have visible light, and then on the left is radio waves, microwaves, and infrared, and then on the right you have ultraviolet, X-rays, and gamma rays. Well, this works very similar to that. But what you're seeing in this diagram would equate to something along the lines of the visible spectrum. There are so many project management methodologies, it would be absolutely ridiculous, perhaps even impossible, for me to go over all of them in this class. But we are going to cover for most of them, and really the most important ones. And we'll even take a peek just beyond the outer edges of both the sequential and the agile ends of the spectrums. But do notice here that as you move from one end of the spectrum to the other, the point of the spectrum is that your projects will become increasingly more iterative and will have more incremental processes and deliverables towards the agile end of the spectrum. The most common way to plan out a project is to do what's called sequencing each of the tasks that lead to a larger final deliverable and work on them in a very specific order until that final deliverable is complete. This process is sometimes given a bucket term of the waterfall method. However, the waterfall method is, in fact, only one of a handful of sequential methodologies in project management. So let's start there with the waterfall method. This is a very traditional method for managing projects, and the one that is generally the simplest to understand. You have to complete one task before the next one begins, and sort of in a connected sequence of items that add up to the overall deliverable. It's an ideal method for projects that result in physical objects, like buildings, computers, or print and packaging designs. Photographers would often use a very sequential method. And one of the major benefits of the waterfall method is that if done correctly and well thought on the front end, project managers can very easily replicate the project plans for future use. And the power of this methodology is that every step is pre-planned and laid out in the proper sequence. While this may be the simplest method to implement initially, any changes in stakeholder needs or priorities will really disrupt the series of tasks following it, making it very difficult to manage a much longer project, especially if there's a lot of changes in the beginning. If you've ever heard the phrase change order, this typically means that something a stakeholder asked for likely changed the initial direction a more sequential method typically follows. And that also typically results in additional costs for the organization that is requesting said change. And this methodology really excels in predictability, but generally lacks in flexibility. Once you set the project timeline, you really want to kind of stick to it. The critical path method was developed in the 1950s based on the idea that there are some tasks that you really can't start until you finish the previous one. And when you string these dependent tasks together from start to finish, you plot out what's called your critical path. Identifying and focusing on this critical path allows project managers to prioritize and allocate resources to get the most important work done and reschedule any lower priority tasks that may be clogging up the team's bandwidth. This way, if you need to make changes to the project schedule, you can optimize the team's work process without delaying the results. And a Gantt chart is one of the most common ways to visualize the critical path in project management. Critical chain project management takes the critical path method even one step further. CCPM is a methodology that focuses on the resources needed to complete the project's tasks by adding resource availability to the critical path. It also builds buffers of time around these tasks in the project's schedule, ensuring the project meets its deadlines. All right, shifting gears a little bit, one way to think about the relationship between the various subsets of Agile is to consider Agile as descendants of lean thinking. And we're going to talk about lean thinking in greater detail here, but in short, lean thinking is a superset of project management which shares attributes with Agile. The shared heritage is very similar and focuses on delivering value, respect for people, minimizing waste, being transparent, adapting to change, and continuously improving. In Agile, project teams sometimes find it useful to blend various methods. The methods blended may ultimately vary from organization to organization, or even sometimes from team to team. But the objective of Agile is to create the best outcome regardless of the approach that's used. Just a quick intro to Agile. The Agile project management methodologies have been really growing in popularity for years, largely thanks to a highly competitive business environment and the increased rate of innovation over the past 2 decades. There's also a TikTok and Instagram reel that's going around about how I'm a Scrum Master. What does that mean? If you've seen it, you probably know it. But in general, Agile methodologies prioritize much shorter iterative cycles and higher flexibility. In contrast to something like the waterfall method, which are typically very long projects where an individual deliverable, no matter how small, may not be realized for months or even years, and the overall process lacks flexibility, Agile invites the opportunity for frequent check-ins and stakeholder feedback and even changes. The core of the Agile methodology was developed in 2001 for mostly the tech industry, and it was created with 4 central pillars. The first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Then you have working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. The Agile Manifesto for software development introduced the tech industry to a really groundbreaking mindset on delivering value and collaborating with customers. Today, Agile can refer to these values as well as the frameworks for implementing them, including Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and the Adaptive Project Framework, which are going to be the 4 Agile frameworks that we're going to look at today. There are more than 4 Agile methods, but for now, and really most of the class, we're really going to focus on these top 4 models. We'll briefly cover some of the outliers in lecture 2.3, but for the most part, anything beyond these first 4 methods are really just variants or combination of these 4. So you have Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and Crystal. Again, we'll look at each of those in greater detail here, and we'll revisit them again in lecture 2.3. But first, what do these various Agile frameworks have in common? No matter the Agile method you choose for a project, and there are frameworks to help us do that, these features or commonalities will really just remain the same and remain true no matter what. Project objectives are made clear by the customer, whether it's internal or external, while the final deliverable can change as the project progresses. And then the project team works in very iterative cycles, always evaluating the results at the end of each cycle. And depending on the results of those evaluations, the final deliverables may be modified to better answer the customer's needs. Continuous collaboration is always key, both within the project team and with project stakeholders as well. Starting off with Scrum. Scrum is the most popular Agile development framework because it's relatively simple to implement. It also solves many problems that designers and software developers struggled with in the past, such as really convoluted design or development cycles or inflexible project plans and shifting production schedules. So in Scrum, a small team is led by what is called a Scrum Master, whose main job is to clear away any obstacles to the team being able to work efficiently. The team works in short 2-week cycles called sprints, though the team members may meet every week or maybe even every workday to discuss their tasks and any roadblocks that need clearing throughout the project. And this methodology allows for really rapid development and testing, especially within small teams, because you're not so worried about getting it right the first try. It's almost expected you're going to get it wrong. And then Kanban is another framework for implementing Agile-based methodologies on a team's capability or capacity. It sort of originated in Toyota's factories during the 1940s. The departments used a visual system of cards, which translates to Kanban, to signal that their team was ready for more raw materials and had more capacity to produce. And the Kanban method is inspired by the original lean manufacturing system and used specifically for knowledge work. It emerged in the tech industry around the mid-2000s, so around the same time as the Agile Manifesto, as an alternative to the Agile methods that were prevalent at the time. And today, this visual approach to managing projects is really well suited to the work that requires steady output. Project teams create visual representations of their tasks, often using something like sticky notes and whiteboards, or now we even have digital Kanban boards. And you move those tasks through sort of predetermined lanes or stages to see progress as it happens and identify where roadblocks could occur at any given stage. The Kanban method is much less prescriptive than some Agile approaches and also less disruptive, as it's sort of the original start where you are approach. Project teams can sort of begin applying the Kanban method with relative ease and progress toward other Agile approaches if that's what they deem is necessary or appropriate for their team or their project. Extreme programming is another offshoot of Agile, and XP is a methodology designed to enhance a product's quality and simplicity, and a design and development team's ability to adapt to customers' needs. Much like the original Agile formula, XP features short work sprints, frequent iterations, and constant collaboration with stakeholders. And really, change can happen within a sprint within XP. If work hasn't started on a specific feature, it can be swapped out and replaced by a similar task. Now, in case you're scrutinizing this diagram and wondering what all of these phrases are, the term spike is a task to research a question and resolve problems. Release planning is the process of defining the scope, timeline, and objectives for a series of releases or iterations. So, in other words, the project plan, which we sort of learned about in the previous lecture as being scope, timeline, and budget. And then acceptance testing refers to a really crucial piece or practice where the customer or stakeholder actively participates in testing the developed features by defining scenarios and verifying if the software behaves as expected. Sometimes this is an entire individual or sometimes multiple roles on a project team called user acceptance testers or UATs. And then the adaptive project framework sort of grew from the difficulty of managing most IT projects using traditional project management methods, primarily due to uncertain and just really vastly changing requirements. And notice that this looks an awful lot like a waterfall, but there's a sort of odd loop in the middle there that reconnects the client feedback phase to the cycle plan. Also note that loop says repeat until time/cost budget are expended. Ouch, okay, what does that mean? It means that an APF project will always start with a requirements breakdown structure, or what's called an RBS, also known as the project scope. So there's all kinds of names to call a project scope. But these are essentially just sub-functions and features. The project then sort of proceeds in iterative stages, and at the end of each step, teams evaluate previous results to improve performance and practices. However, stakeholders can also change the project scope at the start of each stage, so the team can produce the most business value. All right. Next, we have the project management methods that practically veer into business process management, or BPM, where each approach focuses on work as a collection of processes. And now we're looking just toward the outer edge of the Agile side of project management and the sort of project management approach spectrum that we saw at the beginning of the lecture. While project management purists may argue that these methods belong in a different list, I think these are still good ways to plan and execute a project. So, process-based project management is a methodology aligning all project objectives with a company's larger mission and corporate values. All project goals and tasks remain strategic and should be married to the larger corporate or organizational objectives. The steps involved include defining the process, establishing metrics, measuring methods, adjusting goals when older ones prove to be unstable, planning improvements, and ultimately creating a plan to implement all of that. Lean is a methodology focused on streamlining and cutting out waste. The first step to create a work process breakdown is to identify and hopefully eliminate bottlenecks and delays. The goal of Lean is to effectively do more with less, to deliver value to the customer using less people power, less money, and less time. So from there, Six Sigma is really a statistics-based methodology used to improve business practices by reducing deficits and errors, minimizing variation, and increasing quality and efficiency. This typically has the added benefit of improving the quality of a process by measuring the defects present and eliminating as many as possible. A process can actually attain what's called a Six Sigma rating if 99.99966%, which sort of roughly converts to a 3.4 errors per 1 million of the final product, your project deliverable effectively must be defect-free. Whether that product is physical or digital really doesn't matter, but this practice is incredibly common in mass product manufacturing. And this is achieved by using a structured approach called a DMAIC. It's actually an acronym: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And we use this acronym to identify and eliminate causes of variation and improve processes. So a really great example of this, as I'm sure you can see by the image, is the In-N-Out menu. They have reduced their product down so that they literally only produce a handful of items using all of the same ingredients to produce a limited variety of meal offerings that come out perfect every single time. From there, we can actually combine those two, Lean and Six Sigma, to create the minimalist approach of Lean, which is no waste, and the quality improvement of Six Sigma, zero defects, into Lean Six Sigma, which focuses on eliminating waste so that products are more efficient, cost-effective, and truly answer customers' needs. And then, carrying on a little bit, some of the methodologies deal with managing projects, but with an extra focus on what's called change management, especially around planning for risks and taking control of change when it happens. So some of the notable methods here would include event chain methodology, or ECM, and what's called extreme project management, or XPM. Just like the other methods, we're going to break these down a little bit further too. Event chain methodology is a procedure that evaluates uncertainties and risks in planning a project. It uses the popular technique, it's a mathematical technique called the Monte Carlo analysis, and we use that to predict the occurrence of certain events that can impact an ongoing project in hope of preparing responses for, or even mitigating changes to or deviance from the project schedule, project deliverables, or even just the overall project success. And the underlying idea behind event chain methodology is that the potential risks often lie outside the project's scope. It's essential to prepare for these risks and plan your actions and responses. Unexpected events will always impact your project schedule and your project's deliverables, but they also could affect the entire project's success. So planning around those, really important. That's what event chain methodology, or ECM, does. And then this one's always fun. Extreme project management, or XPM, is frankly the antithesis or complete lack of project management. And since everything in business needs a name, we gave the stressful hurls of just get it done the sort of oxymoronic title of extreme project management. This offers you a way to manage massive, sometimes completely unrealistic expectations and levels of change, yet still move forward towards some degree of project completion. In XPM, you can alter the project plan, you can alter the budget, and even the final deliverables to fit changing needs, no matter how far along the project is. Now, you may be wondering, why on earth would anyone want to manage a project in this way? Frankly, that's how most people who have no clue what project management is, sort of manage their projects. If you ask me, this is absolute chaos. But where this does actually come in handy is when managing projects within very short timelines. Typically, anywhere from a few weeks to just mere days, instead of something like a project that may go on for months. One of my little Cameronisms that I like to say, and write this down, is although we typically look at stress as a bad thing, many of us are capable of enduring some degree of intense stress in relatively short durations. This is a very well-engineered machine. Our bodies are capable of incredible things. So sometimes extreme project management might put this engine in a weird spot, but we can get it done. On a project that takes only 1 to 2 weeks, it doesn't really make much sense to take the time planning out every inch of the darn thing. Frankly, it might take you longer to plan the project than it will just to get the things done and build it. This is really where XPM works best. All right. Lastly, we're going to take a look at the PMBOK method. And you'll notice the word method is in quotes here. That's because it may be a little bit debatable whether this is a true project management methodology. You will find organizations that say they use the project management body of knowledge or the PMBOK method for managing projects, so I'm going to include it as a methodology here. While not an official methodology, this system involves breaking down projects into 5 process groups agreed upon by the Project Management Institute, or PMI, and it's documented in the Guide to Project Management Body of Knowledge, or PMBOK. And these 5 stages, which hopefully should sound somewhat familiar, are initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing. Again, that should sound pretty familiar. We covered that in our last lecture. When I was talking about what project managers do, I said project managers are responsible for the planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and completing of projects. Now, this is important because this class pulls reference from a number of different sources to provide a more comprehensive view of as many project management methodologies as possible. But the PMBOK is really the textbook for project management, and ultimately why it's the chosen textbook for this class. The PMBOK collects set processes, best practices, terminologies, and guidelines that the project management industry accepts as standards. You'll find it all documented in the book, A Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge. It's the PMBOK Guide, and it's compiled and overseen by the Project Management Institute. The PMBOK Guide provides project managers with guidelines and best practices, defining everything from the project lifecycle to the project management strategies and concepts. And the PMBOK Guide details the various project management processes that interact and overlap throughout a project's lifecycle. So PMBOK officially recognizes 47 typical project management processes organized into 10 knowledge areas, and those are the 10 knowledge areas that you see here. Starting with project communication management. These are processes that disseminate information among team members and external stakeholders, ensuring that data is exchanged continuously and, more importantly, understood by all who are concerned within the project. Project cost management are the processes that regard budgets, funding, spending allocation, and timing. And cost management is dependent on activity estimates from time management. So another way to look at that is how much time is it going to take someone to complete it? Those people have a supposedly hourly rate. That is how you can sort of estimate those costs. Project human resources management are processes involving managing your project team, like sourcing hiring, assigning roles, professional development, and fostering team spirit. Project integration management are the processes that are necessary to define, consolidate, and coordinate all the other processes and project management activities. And these processes are vital in setting expectations and keeping communication lanes open. Project procurement management are processes for planning, budgeting, and purchasing resources, whether physical or informational, to get the work done and to get the work completed. Project quality management are the processes that define a project success or criteria for considering the task complete. The team will manage quality at every stage of the project, from planning to continuous performance improvement. And then project risk management are the processes involved with preparing for and managing unexpected risks that may pop up during your projects. Project scope management are the processes of managing the scope or parameters of a project. Project stakeholder management are the processes that identify who will be impacted by the project and managing the relationships with them, including strategies for collaborating with stakeholders on project direction and execution. And then project time management are the processes needed to ensure the project is completed before the specified deadline. All right. That's it for today's topic. That was sort of a lot to throw at you, but it was important that I get you all into seeing some of the variables we're working with here. In this class, we'll mostly be looking at Agile project management and perhaps a bit of sequential project management. However, it's more common in our industry that teams will need to be agile and adapt to change quickly, so that's really why we will be prioritizing Agile project management. In our next lecture, we'll be covering project management life cycles, which are all the various phases of any project. And we'll take a look at how you might go about choosing the right one of those methodologies that we talked about today for some of your future projects.